Okay, hello, and welcome back to our podcast, episode 6. I'm Trinity Thomas. I'm a third year elementary education student from Zebulon, North Carolina.
My name is Asia Salaam. I am a second year elementary education major from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Hi, my name is Besiant. I'm a second year elementary education major from Los Angeles, California.
Hi everyone, my name is Kennedy Roberts. I'm a second year elementary and special education major from Haymarket, Virginia.
Okay, thank you for introductions. And to kick off our podcast this episode, we're going to start with considerations when using written response. And this chapter kind of summarizes the benefits and I guess the pros and the cons you could say of written response. So it says that written response is best on for knowledge level and reasoning level learning targets with a couple limitations, of course. But when there are targets like specific facts or concepts, selected response formats provide a more efficient means of assessment and allow for a more precise sampling, say for multiple choice questions. If you're covering a lot of ground in a concept, multiple choice, you can use more multiple choice than you could written response. It allows more time and you can kind of cover more ground. But I think when it comes to written response, you can kind of dive more deep into what the student knows. You can really ask them to explain their reasoning and what they're thinking. And it also says you can obtain an accurate measure of achievement. And you get a broader sample of performance per unit of time. So a written response is better when testing students' mastery of content, especially when they involve interrelated structures of knowledge or conceptual understanding. And and then it says that written response assessment is a strong match for reasoning because you can't see how a student might find the reasoning for something, but you can ask them to describe it and their reasoning process and then convey the results in a written form. And then doing this means that we can see if students know how to find the result themselves, opposed to multiple choice and making educated guess based off what's done in class. So we want to know that our student can do what they're doing in here without our help. And I feel like that's really beneficial in things like math. Like, in our class with Dr. Carter, she makes us write out how we found what we found. So I feel like that's really beneficial. And then it does talk about the limitations in certain situations, which is students with disabilities or younger students who are in early writing stages, personal communication is the better form of assessment needed. And my kind of takeaway from this is that this portion of the chapter highlights the importance of ensuring that your students are learning and receiving the lesson by having them explain it using written response assessment. It also explains that while it is important and a great tool in the classroom, it's not suitable for all situations. And as educators, it's important to know when to use certain forms of assessment. And as an educator, I would use personal, and because I'm working with younger students, I would use personal communication and I would introduce written response assessment to them at an earlier age.
That was really good, Trinity. So in the section of creating a high quality written response assessment, they talk about 8 different steps. I'm gonna go over 4, and then Nyla will go over the rest later on. And so step 1 is like making sure that the questions match the learning target. So if the assessment doesn't line up with like what was actually taught, then it's not fair to the students. Step 2 talks about writing clear and focused questions. And then step 3 is thinking ahead about scoring. And then step 4 is to check for fairness. What I really took away from it is that written response assessments are valued because they let students actually show their thinking, not just pick the right answer. So, like with multiple choice questions, you either know it or you don't. But like with written response, you can explain your reasoning and like show your understanding of it, even and like be like more creative. So of course that only works like if the questions are written well. And the book talks about a lot about how important it is for questions to be clear and focused. If the wording is like confusing or doesn't really connect with what we've been learning, then students might not be able to fully show like what they know. So that made sense to me because it definitely tests how like well definitely I've definitely had tests where like the wording threw me off, or even when I like really knew the material. So like another point that stood out to me was fairness. A good written response assessment should give all students a fair chance. So that means like not making the questions tricky or like on purpose or adding like extra details that don't really matter. Instead, it should give students the opportunity to show what they've actually learned. So I also thought it was interesting how much planning goes into these integrating these. Like teachers have to think about how they're going to score responses, usually with like rubrics, and that way grading is more consistent and students also know what's expected from the start. And so, as someone who's preparing to be a teacher, this really made me think about how I'll write questions one day. And it's not just about asking something and collecting answers, it's about being intentional so students can think critically and really show their learning. And so, overall, the big things I took away from this section were that clarity and fairness in having a plan for how to evaluate responses. And so, when teachers do all of that, written response assessments can actually help students learn and not just measure what they know.
All right, Asia, that was awesome. Okay, so I kind of took a deep dive into step 5, step 6, step 7, and step 8. Step 5 was about developing and selecting the items. So this is where not students, this is where teachers kind of write or choose the actual written response questions. The goal is kind of to just like design prompts that align with learning targets, and that like give clear evidence of student thinking. That means that in this, we're trying to avoid vague or confusing wording and making sure the prompt requires the kind of reasoning or explanation that you want students to practice. It's really all about just being very intentional in how every item should really connect directly to an learning target. For step 6, we have review or critique the overall assessment before use. So I feel like before we give an assessment to students, we need to put ourselves in their shoes. Does my assessment truly measure the intended target? Are there questions that are unclear or misleading? Do all the prompts match the rubric or the scoring criteria? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves to help us put ourselves in our students' shoes and kind of just make sure that, when they are taking the assessment, they're going to understand everything that is on that paper. And you also just kind of want to avoid like all of your students kind of coming to you and asking you the same question over and over and over again, or asking you to clarify something over and over and over again. Because if they do, that means that something was done wrong on your part. So this review is kind of like quality control, just kind of making sure the assessment is fair and valid and useful before students ever see it. So then we have step 7, use the assessment. Once the assessment is ready, it's time to really kind of put it in practice. So the key here is to remember that written response aren't just for grading. They should also be given like for feedback for students and to the teachers. The way students respond can highlight both strengths and areas that need more instruction. When we look at step 8, no assessment is perfect the first time. Step 8 is really all about reflecting and revising. After the assessment, we want to kind of ask ourselves, did it capture the learning I wanted? Did the students understand the directions? Were the scoring criteria clear enough? And based on what you learn, you refine the items and improve the tool for next time. So I think for like my critical reflection, I think that like reading about all of these steps made me think about how assessments often worked when I was personally in school. A lot of the time, like teachers would hand out tests or written prompts that oftentimes felt confusing. And I felt like I was constantly, as a kid, getting up and like asking my teacher, hey, what does this mean? Hey, I don't remember learning this. Hey, I don't think I even remember what this even means. And it was just really, really confusing and it didn't really match what we had really learned. So I would kind of, even when like my teacher would send me back to sit back down, I would even still sit there thinking like, wait, is this even what we were supposed to be practicing? Like, and that's what I feel like step 6, reviewing assessments beforehand, that's why it matters so much. But I also had a very different experience. One time, I will say in like probably like one of my English classes when I was in middle school, my teacher had like tested her essay prompts on us as practice before she graded them, really. So she would give us a question and collect like a few sample answers and then ask us to like critique what we kind of wrote. So she wanted to like see like, was what we said clear? Did it match what we were like the book that we were studying? She even let us like suggest changes that we would make. So it was kind of like the whole class would kind of revise one person's essay. And at first I was like, why is she letting the whole class like see somebody else's, essay? And like that's what I thought at first, but then looking back, it was kind of like it kind of tied into section step 8, which is refining the assessment based on how students interacted with it. So she was kind of trying to see like where our mind and where our head was at and how we were kind of revising everything. I feel like that experience showed me that assessments don't have to be fixed, which is like kind of like one size fits all for like assessments, and that they do essentially evolve, and that when teachers take the time to develop, review, use, and refine their assessments, it makes the test a lot fairer and it makes the learning more authentic. The bigger question for me is that like assessments aren't just about judging student work. They're also about teachers just improving their own practice. And I feel like a well-designed assessment helps both sides learn more efficiently.
That was really good, Nylan. Thank you for that. So my section is about written response assessments. And so written response assessments, when used formatively, can be a powerful tool for student learning. Instead of just measuring students and what they know at the end, they become a way to guide students throughout the process. So instead of just being a test at the end, we're going to make sure we have different points throughout like the unit to make sure that students are on track so that they're not bombarded with the test at the end and they realize at the end that they don't know. They know all along what they need to work on. And one important part is providing students with a clear and understandable vision of the learning target. So we don't just want to like post it on the board because especially for elementary school students, some of them don't understand that or they can't even read it yet. So we really want to make sure we're breaking it down and making sure they set actionable goals to reach the learning target. So they break it down so it's simple for them to understand and follow. And then when students know what success looks like, they're more likely to stay focused and motivated. So if we set a goal, you might give them a reward. Like if you focus on your math for this amount of time or you get this certain math score, the class gets a pizza party. If you do this much reading time at home, you get extra recess, things like that to motivate them to stay on track, especially for younger students who don't have the intrinsic motivation yet. And then another key piece is offering regular and descriptive feedback. I know, especially in college, I appreciate feedback. Like I know Dr. Holzberg gives like really good feedback, and then it helps me to know what to do better the next time. And then the feedback should be specific and actionable. So, for example, if a student's not doing well in math, we don't just want to say needs work. You want to be like, oh, you got 5 problems correct. Let's try next time to get 10 problems correct, something that they can actually work towards. And it moves beyond just saying good job or needs improvement, like I just said. And then finally, teaching students to self-assess and set goals for their own next steps is essential. So, since we're in elementary school, we want to make sure we're instilling intrinsic motivation, excuse me. And so, for example, like you want to instill in your students that they want to work hard for themselves, not just to get a reward. Because when you get to middle and high school, there's not as many incentives. And we know in college, you have to do your own work yourself and you have to be the one motivating you because no one else is going to do it. So, since we're in elementary school, we're setting the foundation for that. So, we want to make sure that we're really making sure that our students are self-motivated and building that muscle so that they can motivate themselves. And then that helps them take ownership of their learning, reflect on their progress, and build the skills that they need to be independent learners. And so from the reading, what really stands out to me about this approach is how it changes the way assessment is used in the classroom. It's not just about handing out grades, it's making sure our students are building up skills so that they are good test takers, but also good learners as well. Because if you're able to set goals and achieve goals in your learning, you can do more than just take a test. You can teach yourself things. You can know how to reach out, ask for help, advocate for yourself, things like that. And it's about helping students see where they are now and how to grow. Just because you're at one point doesn't mean you're going to stay there. It's kind of like growth mindset where we want to make sure that our students know that they can do better and helping them reach their goals and helping them reach a better place on a specific subject. I think giving students a clear and simple vision of the learning target is so important because kids can't hit a target that they can't see. If you just slap a learning target on the board and say, this is what we're doing, this is what you need to reach, kids don't know what they need to do and practical steps they can do to reach that goal. So we want to make sure we're being very clear about what we want them to do. When they know when they know what they're aiming for, it gives them confidence and direction. When they see that they've reached a goal that they were working towards, it's going to build their confidence. A lot of learning is confidence based. If you are not confident about math, you're not going to feel like you are able to do it. However, if you are working towards being confident and you build up the confidence to learn math, you're going to be better at it, and you're going to be more open to trying new things and trying to be better at it. Um, the part about descriptive feedback also resonated with me because students need more than just a score. They need to hear what they're doing well and what specific steps can help them move forward. And I know I volunteer in first grade, and I know for them, they really care about when I say they're doing well. Like first graders really value like teacher validation. So making sure that you're telling your students, oh, you're doing a great job. Even if they need something to work on, tell them something positive they're doing to help build up their confidence so that they know that they're doing something well. Because even if they're making mistakes, they're doing something right. They might have a good attitude. They might be trying hard. They might have gotten part of the question correct. So we really want to make sure we're building up the confidence for students. And then for me, the most powerful piece of teaching students to self-assess is this, excuse me, the most powerful part is teaching students to self-assess and set goals because for me as a teacher, I'm only going to have them for 1 year potentially. So I want to make sure I'm building up the skills so they know how to self-assess and have the confidence to try new things when they go to the next grade because I'm not going to be with them. So I really want to make sure I'm building up their intrinsic motivation. And then I think this is especially meaningful in elementary school and special education settings because it helps students to build independence, believe in their abilities, and develop a growth mindset. That's the kind of classroom culture I want to create where students can be self-sustainable and make sure that they are understanding what they need to do to grow, setting their own goals, and working towards reaching their own goals so they can be independent in their learning. So, yes.
Okay, Kennedy, that was really, really great. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask, does anybody have any questions they want to ask? Maybe anything focusing on your section of the chapter? You
Yeah,
know,
I can definitely start off with a question. So to kind of based off what I was kind of talking about, like I said, I went through steps 5 through 8. What do you guys think are some strategies that can that teachers can use to make sure written response are like prompts are clear, fair, and directly connected to learning targets? So I think I hit this when I was covering like what my middle school English teacher did. I think that just making sure that but prior reviewing like test questions that you think that you're thinking about putting on your students' test, prepping them on those. Like I remember when sometimes when like our teacher would kind of give a lecture, she would ask like a question and it would be like, oh, based on our book, how did you guys how did I don't know, like it would be like something like random. And then like I would like randomly see it like pop up on our test and I remember learning about it. So I think that kind of helps is kind of testing the questions that you're going to put, like testing them on it prior, like asking them like about it before. I don't know if any of what I'm saying is making sense, but yeah, I would say probably like testing them on it before you put it on the test to see if they actually understand it. And if they don't, then that's definitely something that you need to review before you actually give them the assessment.
Rylan, I really did agree with what you just said. That was a great answer. That was a great question to ask. I think I kind of understand what you're saying, and what I think is using language on these questions that they understand are things that we've taught them in class. Like you can't teach them, oh, this is how you use the language to do this type of problem, and then put something completely different on a written response homework question or written response on a quiz because they're not going to know what you're asking. And if you're going to use different language on those things, like you said, you need to review that stuff beforehand or like stuff that they're going to have on these assessments, that stuff needs to be reviewed beforehand because when they get there and they don't understand the question, it confuses them and that's what makes them mess up. That's what makes them reply wrong or like they don't know how to explain, like they know how to get there, but they don't know how to explain it. It's just you have to use the correct language when working with your students, especially working with younger grades like how we are. Because like I said, if they're a little bit younger, obviously you're not going to start written response, you're going to start personal communication. But even then, getting them familiar with that language at a young age is going to be very beneficial when they start moving up in grades, like what Kennedy said, like building those stepping stones to get them ready for the next grade because you won't have them next year.
I definitely agree with all of you. And I think like, especially with like standardized tests, I know they try to trip up students on purpose. So when I'm in the classroom, like obviously I can't control like the standardized testing, but like when I'm assessing my students and making the test for my students, I'm not going to use questions to purposely trip up my students or talk about things that we didn't discuss in class. Like that's my number one pet peeve with like teachers, like when they put stuff on the test that we never talked about. So for me, I'm going to use things like obviously that I taught, and then I'm going to go over specific examples of similar questions and the style of questions and like what might be asked on the test so that my students are prepared for the assessment.
Yeah, I kind of had like this exact same question, so I had already some answers. But I said making sure that like it aligned with like the learning goals. So make sure like yeah, it's something that we taught in class and that it's going to be something they should be able to answer through the stuff we've done in class, and make sure that like we use clear and like simple wording so it's like not confusing and they're like what are we talking about? Also like using easier prompts, especially like with the younger kids, we don't want like a complex prompt. And then I said working on like model sample questions in class. So like that way they're prepared when they see that on the test and they're not like, well, what do I say? And like even like with like our EDRP class and like we do 240 tutoring and we have to take like the sample questions to get ready for like the praxis test. I think like stuff like that like really helps to get prepared for like the real thing.
Okay, well, I had another question. I actually have two questions. One, um, I know we had talked about forms of assessment in a previous episode, and I know that a lot of us kind of agreed that personal communication was our like most preferred form of assessment because we all like to, talk and communicate things out. But between written response and selective response, which one do y'all feel like, I guess, does more, like it benefits the students more? Because in my opinion, I think written response does benefit students more because with multiple choice, you have a strong chance of selecting one and it'll just be right. Like you can kind of make a, what's it called? An informed like guess. And it's because you have those answers, and it's like one of those is gonna kind of stick more out to you, or like kind of scream more out to you, or at least one or two. So I feel like maybe written response is better because you can really see that your students are understanding what you're teaching and see that they can do it themselves. And then now like they teach students in different ways, but they teach them those ways because that's how you have to do it for testing, like for EOGs, things like that. So to make sure your students are understanding a new way that you've taught them a concept.
I definitely agree with you. I think that written response is better. And even like in college, like when the teacher has like written response questions, I'm like, oh, I actually have to study because if it's multiple choice, I can make a guess. But written response really shows what you know. Like if you don't know it, you can't like make something up. So I think written response really is good for teachers and as well as students because it like works on their writing skills and their analysis skills, but it also helps the teacher to know what the students really do know.
That's another thing it talked about in the chapter. It talked about how written responses not just know what they know, but it's also the practice that we're writing like sentence fluency and knowing how to word things and what language to use and stuff. Because in math, Dr. Carter's class, there's a lot of like language in class that needs to be used when you're explaining those problems on those quizzes. So that's also a big thing.
Yeah, I definitely think that that written response is a lot better. I think that it does, help us tap into our students' thinking. Like you guys said, sentence fluency. We're trying to also, get into grammar and things like that. But I also think that there's a way that you can kind of implement both of those into the same thing, because I do feel like multiple choice, we can also help tap multiple choice into our students' thinking as well. I think that my idea, if I was to go in as a teacher and let's say I wanted to try multiple choice for the first time, I would um, definitely have multiple choice answers, but in those answers, it's definitely different ways how a student can get to a wrong answer. So let's say like we're talking about algebra and they're using PEMDAS, and let's say you accidentally use subtraction before addition, then you would get this answer. Or um you accidentally did division before your multiplication. So you would get this answer. Or I would probably put like a other box at the end and see how they got another answer that's probably not even on there, and that kind of would also help tap into our students' thinking as well. Does it take a lot more time when we're actually like creating the assessment? Of course. But I do think that it's also another way that, if you do want to try multiple choice, that in a way that can also help you tap into your students' thinking as well.
So actually my second question was, do you, as a teacher, do you like written response questions more than multiple choice questions, vice versa, or both? So I also have an answer for that as well. So I think like with like written response questions, like Nyland said, like it really lets your students explain their thinking and not just get a final answer. And then it shows like depth and an understanding of like, like their process of thinking. And then like with selected response, like it can be good, like I think for like vocabulary and stuff like that, like when students are like looking for like what is the definition of this, that, you know but like I feel like overall like written response is just a better way just to see where your students are at, and then like you can kind of help them with, you can see where they're at and like help them get better at whatever the subject or topic is.
Yeah, I think you were right when you said that like it definitely is like based on the subject. Because for some subjects you would definitely use multiple choice more. Other subjects you would use written response more. So I think like when we're talking about math or like reading and writing, I want to use written response because I want to see how are you forming sentences? How are you getting to the correct answer? I want to see those things on written response. But there's like other things that I would definitely use multiple choice for. Maybe like if we're covering like history or something like that, because I just want to see, do you know the content? Do you understand like what happened in this era? What happened in this era? Like, and if you don't, then I understand, like, okay, you just don't understand what happened. And
Mhm.
that's fine. And we can kind of, get to a solution about that. But I do think it's subject based when we're looking at assessments as well. Some subjects, written response works a whole lot more. And then other subjects, multiple choice works um, a whole lot more. So I think it is more subject based than just what's better. You know what I mean?
And I'm going to add on something else, just one last thing. I think that when you are doing written response assessment, you also need to change the way that you are teaching or preparing your students. Because I know a lot, like what you said in history, multiple choice is good in history because, like, history, we used to use Blooket a lot, Blooket, Kahoot, things like that. And I feel like when you're doing those type of things, the way that you're learning is you're memorizing. And I feel like when you're memorizing, like for me, I would start looking for like I think what you said earlier, you start looking for those keywords and you'd be like, oh, so like I know like this is that. But I feel like that doesn't work when you have to do written response. Because written response, you have to explain how you know it, how you got there. And that's why you said like subject wise, it doesn't work for everything. And I think you also, and if you are going to use it for a subject where it's not commonly used that way, you need to switch the way that you're teaching your students or what you're implementing in your classroom so that they can still explain what they're learning.
Okay, does anyone have any more questions or anything that they would like to add on about our chapter today? No. Okay, if not, then that was the end of our podcast. I hope everybody got everything that they needed to say off their chest today. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week.